King Kaiser. In early March of 2018, the Twitter account for Prey posted a short GIF of a camera panning towards the moon and asking, "Do we really know what's out there?" Some people responded confused. Somebody replied with a link to a video from NASA showing a 4K tour of the moon, but most outlets suspected that this was hinting towards more Prey content, most likely in the form of DLC. Well, at E3 2018, during the Bethesda conference, Arcane Studios came out and announced quite a few things for Prey. They announced the addition of a new Game Plus mode, a story mode, a survival mode, and of course, if you're watching this video, they announced some DLC for Prey, called Mooncrash, promising a roguelike experience that takes place on the moon, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump away from the Talos 1 space station the first game took place on. Now, for me, this got me so damn excited. I'm a huge fan of roguelike games, having sank over 200 hours into Binding of Isaac, over 100 hours into Enter the Gungeon, and many more. They promised new enemies, new weapons, and a dynamic experience that changed each time you played. Well, did they deliver on this promise? I gotta say, yes. In fact, I'd say heck yes. I think I enjoyed the 18 or so hours I spent playing the DLC on the whole more than I enjoyed the 16 or so hours I spent playing the main game. Now, that's not to say that I think this is better than the main game. You definitely should play it first, as it provides a lot of context to the DLC as far as what's happening. But during the main game, I got a little frustrated, particularly in the back end, where the game started feeling less rewarding and more of a slog to complete, whereas I was pretty consistently enjoying myself during the DLC. You start the game as a man named Peter, who is basically a slave for a rival company to TranStar called Chasma Corporation. Peter got into this situation by working as a hacker for Chasma. Basically, in the future, if you ever do anything less than perfect for a company, they can put you in debt to the company and make you pay it off by doing just about anything. So Chasma sent Peter to this outpost on the moon to spy on TranStar and their outpost on the moon. I'll be honest, this story is probably the weakest part of the game. It still has some punch, particularly when they show you pictures of Peter's family back home, promising him that he can go back to Earth once he's finished this final mission. But overall, I found myself getting annoyed when the game would pull me out of the gameplay just to send me a 1-minute message. So, how does the gameplay work? Well, you as Peter have a fancy virtual reality device, which allows you to play out simulations of what was happening on the TranStar moonbase. And this plays into how the roguelite elements work in this game. Personally, I was very happy to hear they were taking a roguelite approach to this game, but concerned about how they'd pull it off. And they did a pretty good job, honestly. The map, which consists of 4 fairly large areas, stays mostly the same with some small variables each time. So, for example, in one run a bridge might be broken, or a staircase might be missing, or a whole area could have a missing power supply which you have to manually fix yourself. But all of the progress from one character carries over to another, and this leads me into another cool concept in this game. There are 5 playable characters in the simulation. Each of them has different strengths and weaknesses, and each of them only has access to certain parts of the Neuromod tech trees from the main game. The first character you get to play as is the Volunteer, who the game tries to bill as the weakest character because he has the lowest HP pool, but I think he is my favorite to play because he is the only one who has access to the good Typhoon mods, so he can basically just blow any enemy up without using any guns or ammo. The Engineer gets access to a free turret that she can spawn wherever with a short cooldown, and she's able to use the Repair skill, which allows her to fix broken doors and other equipment which might be broken on any given run. The Security Officer obviously has the highest proficiency with firearms, and he can run insanely fast compared to the other characters, as well as having the highest amount of HP. Apart from this though, he doesn't really shine. The Custodian, who's actually a spy for Chasma Corp, specializes in stealth and hacking, which really just means that she can hack the very few places that need it for special objectives. I do think her character is super interesting though, so I give her a pass. And finally, my least favorite of all the characters, the Director, who is actually a cousin of Morgan and Alex Yu from the first game. This made me excited to play her at first, but then I realized that she is the weakest character in the game, having both low HP, and while she has access to Typhoon mods, the main offensive one she has is so much worse than the Volunteers, as it is only single target and can only affect bioorganisms, so any encounters she has with robotic enemies are very tough for her. There's another big reason that I dislike her, but I'll get into that a little bit later. Each of these characters has to be unlocked while you play, by either finding their corpse on the map as another character, or by completing a certain set of story missions with another. This brings me into the story missions. Each of the characters has a relatively short set of story missions to flesh out the story of the moonbase, which is a really awesome concept for a roguelike game, and some of them intercept with each other in cool ways. As the security officer, you are trying to kill the spy, and as the spy, you are trying to hack and lay traps for some of the other characters. Your objective each time you jump into the simulation is to try and escape with each character. There are only 5 possible ways to escape, and each time you use one, it's unavailable for the rest of the characters left in the simulation. This makes plotting out pathways for each character extremely tense and exciting. Some escapes are definitely easier than others, so if you have a character you dislike to play as, you can give them the easier escape route. Also, since you are sharing a map with all of them, you are also sharing resources. At first, if you go through and take all the guns and ammo for one character and then escape, the next character you play as will have a much harder time since they can't utilize those items. The game gets around this by not only creating a way to transfer items between characters during a run, but it also lets you buy items to beef up your character before you launch them into the simulation. Towards the late game, you can start your character with super upgraded weapons and chipsets, so it becomes a lot less scary, but this does create a good feeling of progression, so I'm all for it. Also, the game introduces the concept of the corruption meter, which slowly fills over time. Every time the corruption meter maxes out, the simulation gets a little bit more corrupt, which is to say, the game gets harder. Enemies will respawn and become upgraded versions of themselves. Also, if the corruption meter hits level 5, you are instantly kicked out of the simulation and forced to start again. This makes for some tense moments as you can see the meter rising. However, the game also introduces an item which will lower the meter, and you can eventually craft it or just load your character up with it before they launch into the simulation, almost guaranteeing that you stay at a low level for the whole run. This is a bit of a bummer since it takes some of the pressure off of you, but hypothetically you are free to not use this option, so you can choose whether to make it hard for yourself or not. Eventually, once you know the map well and get enough upgrades on your characters, you will be running through the map, feeling very optimized and setting things up for other characters to do. In fact, one of the escape routes has to be unlocked by repairing something which you can only do as the engineer, and then hacking a terminal nearby which you can only do as the custodian. Then you have to come back as the volunteer and use that escape route to unlock his story mission. Doing all of this in one run felt extremely rewarding. The game does some interesting things with the Typhon as well, introducing new types of enemies, most notably the Moon Shark, which is this game's big baddie. He patrols the large middle area of the map and can detect movement on the ground vis-a-vis the Tremors worms. He's extremely difficult to take down with normal weapons, and your best option is to use Typhon powers against him. But it's also very possible to try and sneak past him, which will be your best option most times. Also, this game introduces Typhoon Gates, which will pop up anytime a Typhon is near them, usually forcing you to go back and kill whatever Typhon are nearby, so you can't just ignore all of the enemies. However, in the case of the volunteer and the director, once you start getting enough Typhon mods, you also can't use the gates. This creates a big problem, as leaving the starting area nearly requires you to use the gates, and you can't access the whole map without them blocking your path. Fortunately, the volunteer learns an ability which is new to the DLC, allowing him to burrow underground and get past the Typhon Gates. The director, however, has nothing. I've read online that you can use the stun gun to temporarily deactivate the gates, but this still makes her considerably worse in my mind. As far as negatives for this game, there aren't too many major ones. I wish they would have used the looking glass technology that was available in the main game, because I thought that was a really interesting concept. Also in the main game, there was a great sense of verticality, making the glue cannon an extremely useful tool for navigating the map. It's mostly not needed in the DLC, however, and is really only used to deal with some of the environmental hazards, which you could get around in other ways. Also, it would have been nice to see a greater use for some of the character's strengths, such as the hacking skills of the custodian, and something for the security officer to lift with his great strength. I do want to mention this as well, and this is just slightly spoilery, but bear with me. Currently, in the launch version of the DLC, if you complete all of the objectives and get to the end of Peter's story, you can no longer go back and enter the simulation. Instead, you have to start all over from the beginning. This seems like a huge oversight to me, and I know a lot of people are complaining online to Arcane Studios, so hopefully they'll fix this in a patch soon. But if you wanted to pick up this game, I recommend creating a backup save somewhere before the ending. All in all, I think this is an incredibly good piece of DLC. Arcane Studios took an extremely enjoyable game and put a really fun twist on it. My favorite part of this game is how it forces you to improvise so much. So many times I'd be on a good run and then I'd walk around a corner and find a high-level enemy I'd have to kill, or suddenly a bridge that I had used so many runs in a row was gone. Or suddenly one area of a map would have an extra hazard like fire or radiation. And this feeling of making you always think on your feet was really enjoyable. Arcane Studios should be applauded for making a criminally overlooked game and then coming back the next year and supporting it with great DLC. I'm not sure how much financial success they'll find with Mooncrash, but it cements them in my mind as a studio that I will keep my eyes on as I eagerly await their next game.